why? I thought we'd take a look at fretless compared to fretted bass ukuleles. So as a bass player of many years, double bass and bass guitar, I've played fretless bass guitar also for many years. So when I started playing bass ukulele, it was a sort of natural choice to go with fretless. But I have since played quite a few fretted bass ukuleles as well. So I thought I'd just run through the differences between the two today. The actual physical differences between fretless and fretted, and the sounds, and some of the pros and cons. So if you're trying to decide whether to go for fretless or fretted bass ukes, hopefully this might help a bit. So let's start with the fretted bass uke. What are the obvious differences? Well, this one has got frets, as in they're raised pieces of metal off the fingerboard. All right, you can see that there. So, the good things about frets. First of all, what's the point of frets? Well, it's to help intonation or your tuning. So, in other words, if your bass or bass uke or guitar, any fretted instrument is in tune, in other words, the open strings are in tune, when you place your finger in between those frets, it's going to still be in tune. It doesn't really matter where in between the frets are, but your pitch will be good. There are better places. You wouldn't, if you can, get in the middle of the frets. It's a nicer sound, but a fraction either way, as long as you're within the fret, you'll be in tune. Now, obviously, if you're playing your ukuleles or guitars and you're playing chords, it's even more important. But on your bass ukes, a lot of it is to do with the tuning. So as a beginner, if you've got frets there and your bass uke is in tune, as long as you're pressing on the correct fret, your bass will definitely be in tune. Other advantages, well, you can feel the frets, and you never really want to be looking at the fingerboard too much when you're playing. So you can sort of feel your way around the bass a little bit more as well. And of course, the other advantage is if you're used to playing ukulele, you're quite used to having frets there as well. Some of the disadvantages of frets, and there are a few. The first one is it almost slows you down a little bit. I'm just trying to think of the famous bass player, I think it was Jaco Pastorius, who said they're like road bumps. They slow you down as you're moving around. So that's a little bit of an issue, not much. With bass ukes, something I have noticed is because of the thickness of the string, and bearing in mind, you know, they're really quite rubbery, occasionally, especially when you're going further up the bass uke, they tend to slip off the edge of the fingerboard a little bit. See what I mean? Now, that isn't a massive issue. You've just got to be aware of it and be a bit careful when you're playing. But it's just something I thought I would mention. Also as well, because the actual space between the frets is quite small, because of the shrunken size of the bass uke and, of course, the thickness of the strings, sometimes you really have got to press quite hard down the string to make sure it sounds properly. Okay, so the fretless bass uke now. In this case, like most electroacoustic bass ukuleles, it's a lined fingerboard. So it's got lines where you'd expect the frets to go. It's not actually the case, weirdly. The lines on a fretless bass uke indicate really where you should be putting your fingers. So if you think about that logically, on a fretted bass uke, you're putting your fingers in between the frets, but on a fretless, you should, to get it absolutely spot on in tune, be putting your fingers on the actual line. Okay, so the technical difference is obviously it's got no frets. With this one, as you can see, the lines are there to help you, but you don't want to be looking, okay? Now, to play fretless bass, it's all about listening. It's about your intonation. When I was showing you the fretted, basically, once your bass uke is in tune, if you put your fingers down in between the frets, you're in tune. Again, not quite as simple on the fretless because you haven't got those frets to just sort of anchor the intonation. So it is all about where you put your fingers. And literally, by moving your fingers a fraction, you can be in or out of tune. All right, so there we are. Let's have a little look at the fretless fingerboard. Okay, all right, you can see the lines there, but of course, there's no raised fret. Now, if you're new and you're thinking, should I go fretless? Should I go fretted? My first advice would be go fretted. All right, it's going to be easier for you to play. Even if you think about those little things I was talking about with the string coming off, all right, it's going to be much easier to play with intonation. Having said that, you might already be an experienced bass uke player and you fancy having to go fretless. Now all you've got to worry about is listening more. You could have played the violin or cello or double bass. And again, you're going to be confident enough to listen to the notes. And that's the big difference, okay? When you're playing fretless, it's all about listening to your intonation, all right? Even what I just said about fingers on lines, you don't really want to be looking at your fingers. Certainly in the end, you want to be relying on listening rather than looking. So the advantages of fretless, the opposite of what I said a minute ago, there's nothing to slow you down when you're playing. You get more of an upright double bass sound because you can do nice little slides, all right, which we'll show you a bit more in a moment. And for me, first time I played a bass uke, I went over to a shop. They had this one, my fretless, and a fretted in there. And playing the two of them, not knowing anything about bass ukuleles, I just instantly found it nicer to press the thicker strings down without the frets than with the frets. Right, let's have a little listen to fretted versus fretless. Here's some fretted. And some fretless. Fretted versus fretless, or compared. It shouldn't be versus because they've both got good and bad things, and ultimately you could end up like me playing both. So if you're a beginner, would I recommend trying fretless? If I'm honest, I would say go with fretted. If you've never played a violin or a cello or a double bass, your safest option to start with is a fretted bass ukulele. By all means try a fretless, but you may end up having intonation problems and being out of tune. And if you're not experienced at listening to yourself, that can be an issue. And the other thing is, if you're buying a bass uke to play with your ukulele group, you really do need to be making sure you're in tune, okay? So, fretted, great for intonation, great for beginners, great for feeling where you're going. Fretless, you can get that upright sound, especially with the polyurethane rubber strings. So entirely up to you guys. My personal preference is fretless, but I am a double bass player. If you're a beginner, consider going with fretted to start with. So there you go, fretted compared to fretless. I do hope this video has helped. If you've got a comment or a question, please feel free to leave it below. Give us a like if you've enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos. As always, thank you for watching.